broke for lunch, I mentioned that I wished that they had not called this StrengthsFinder. Everything else about the process I love. But what happened is when they finally got the questionnaire done and they were ready to start sharing it with people, they did some market research and they found that people just didn't resonate with the idea of talent, which would make sense. But they did with strengths, and so they called it StrengthsFinder. But the reality is, what we really have in StrengthsFinder is a talent identification process. And the process of building strength is a little bit deeper than that. You know, all of us have certain skills and knowledge, and I always remind people that knowledge isn't only about what we know from books. Those of you that are involved in ministry, you have all kinds of knowledge that doesn't come from books. You know about the people that you work with. You know about the parish people that you interact with. You know a whole lot about the diocese. And that's all a certain body of knowledge that you draw on when you do what you do. We develop certain kinds of expertise. Talent is actually a multiplier. My friend Stephanie calls it Miracle-Gro. You know what happens when you put Miracle-Gro on a plant? All of a sudden it's like, you know, thriving. And that's what happens with talent. So talent, you put talent in the mix, and it actually is a multiplier. It brings out the best of that skills and knowledge and expertise. And that actually is how we end up with strength. And I think it's helpful to remember that because for some of us, you know, our talent themes themselves kind of act as a strength. But for others of us, our strengths are tapping into a combination of talents. And in fact, that's probably the more readily experienced way of knowing a strength. I mentioned that, you know, since I was very, very young, I had people telling me that I write really well. And by the time I was in college, my college English Lit professor was encouraging me to write and to take more classes and so on. It wasn't until I actually started writing professionally that I realized that there was something going on there that I couldn't exactly explain. You know, yes, in fact, I learned all the things that we all learn in English class, but I still am not one of those people that can name the parts of speech, and that's not the way that I do this. It just kind of happens. But when I look at my talent themes, ideation, input, futuristic, connectedness, arranger, I can see how each one of those themes contributes to that strength of writing. You know, I'm always going to have the fresh idea. I always tell people I will never write a history book. Anything that I write is always going to be looking at the future because that's who I am. There are other people that have a different talent that's called context, and they're the ones that are going to be looking at the past. And so we can really reflect on the broad scheme of our experience and begin to name our strengths as well as our talents. And in fact, you have a handout in your packet that helps you to do that. Look at, by the way, we are not going to do these two worksheets today, but I hope that you will do these. Take them home. Spend some time. Talk to each other. Schedule a time to meet with the people that you regularly work with. If you're in a situation where you do meetings together, do a real quick go around at the beginning of a meeting. What's one talent theme that you've used since we last met? Affirm each other. That's how we recognize. Father Bill that I mentioned, he's a master at this. We'll be just talking, and he'll go, "Oh, Lisa, that was a wonderful use of your futuristic talent." And at first I thought he was kind of making it up. No, that's just who he is. That's the way in which he keeps this alive. So take these worksheets and really work with them. And then look at the one that's on the next page that says your strengths at a glance. Think about that first example that came to mind for you of a time when you felt equipped? What was that experience all about? And then, what knowledge were you tapping into? What skills were active in that? What talent themes? It's very likely it was more than one. And then what's the strength? How would you articulate that this is what I do really well? And keep doing that. At the end of the day, take a few moments to stop and think, what went really well today? And then kind of dive into it. You know, when we first started working with strengths at the parish, I took a theme a week. And I spent a week just noticing the times when ideation was at play, and then input, and then futuristic. And at the end of 5 weeks, I really had a good sense of how I was already experiencing those talents. And then I could begin to really use those and build on them for the future. One of the things that I'll be sharing with Jeff is a file that I call The Blessing of the Themes. And it's actually a slight adaptation of an article that was written years ago by Chip Anderson that he called The Genius of the Themes. And I just, worked it a little bit more in terms of blessing. So at the parish, when we first started introducing strengths, our pastoral council and our stewardship committee and our small faith groups and some of our confirmation candidates had already done Strengths Finder by the time we introduced it to the whole parish. And so I gave the parish secretary this file called The Blessing of the Themes. And each week she put one of those descriptions in the parish bulletin. And because I had given them to her in alphabetical order, she put them in alphabetical order. So she did achiever, and then she did activator, and she did adaptability. And I always remember one Monday I walked in the door, my phone rang, and I answered the phone, and this woman said, "You're only on focus." And I'm trying to figure out what the blessing of responsibility is, and I don't want to wait for you to get to the R's. I said, okay, let's talk about that. And actually, that brings up another topic, because it's very interesting. Most of us have at least one theme that we've experienced or that someone else has kind of pushed on us in a negative way. We experience the shadow side, or what Kurt Liesfeld called the basement of the theme. Sometimes it's an immature experience of the theme. We've just not had that understanding of it in such a way as to think about it as a talent. But sometimes there's been someone else in our lives, or our own perception of that quality, that has said, that's not a strength, that's a weakness. I was sharing with some people earlier this week, my former pastor, Father Jan, just as my husband and I were moving from Immaculate Heart of Mary, Father Jan got transferred to a different parish. And he had a seminarian intern with him at one point, and so he gave the seminarian a copy of Living Your Strengths, and said, we try to use this with our staff and with our parishioner leaders, and I think it would be really helpful for you. And then he called me and said, would you be willing to meet with this seminarian? And I said, absolutely. And so we arranged a time, and I went to the parish, and we're sitting in the conference room, and me, my strengths, and I'm going, so what do you think? And he goes, I hate it. Really? All of it? Yes. So, tell me about that. And he said, those 5 things are exactly the 5 things that people have always told me are my weaknesses. And now you're telling me that these are talents. And then he looked at me and he kind of grinned and he said, so you've got some explaining to do. And it took us about 45 minutes. I gave him the little nutshell of the research, and I finally said, so could you look at those 5 things, and could you think of one positive experience with one of those themes? He went, well, yeah. And he told me. And then he goes, oh. And it took us about a half an hour to kind of unpack the rest of it. And by the end of the meeting, he goes, everybody needs to know this. And that's the reality. A lot of us have had that experience of either our own perception or someone else's perception being not a positive about that talent, but actually being a negative about that talent. And so we have to find ways to kind of reclaim this in that very positive light. So I hope that you will take the time to really think about your talents and your strengths, and then begin to look at how do you build on those. How do you really take those and become a better steward of them? So this next little stretch is going to take us a bit of time, but I think it's really important that we do this. I actually want to walk through all 34 themes. And I want to give you just a little nutshell of each one, because I think it's very helpful for us to understand not only our own themes, but to start to think about the themes that other people have, the talents that other people have. So if you would, look at your list and write them, maybe let's look at this. Where do we want to write? On the very first chart, you've got that place where you can just put your top 5. Write them down so that you've got them in front of you. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, as I call out the theme, raise your hand, and that way you guys get to see each other's themes as we do this little walkthrough. Oh, how many of you are list makers? How many of you make lists? What do you do when you do something that's on your list?
Cross it off.
Cross it off, check it, right?
Or even write it out so you can read it.
There you go. So then if you did something that wasn't on your list, you write it so that you get to do that, right? Yeah. That's a little window into the people that have achiever talent. How many of you have achiever? Okay. That achiever talent is a driver. It's this drive to accomplish something. And for people with really strong achiever talent, every day starts at 0. And that experience of crossing it off, they actually say there's an endorphin thing that happens when you get to do that, because it's like saying, yeah, I did it. And so we write it on so that we can cross it off, because we have that really good feeling when that happens. Those people with that achiever talent, they bring that to everything, not only here, but in all of the aspects of their lives. And I say that from real honest to goodness experience. My husband has achiever in his top 5. And he does not make a list, which is really hard, because it's all in his head. So he doesn't always get that experience. And one of the benefits of this has been, now I can say to him, honey, let's stop and let's make the list. And then I'll say, okay, today, Jeff knows this, Sunday, he picked me up at the airport and we're driving to Eau Claire, and my husband texted and said, just got back from a 48-mile bike ride. By the time I got to Eau Claire and started to call him, he texted and said, okay, so I did the bike ride, and then I cleaned the wood shop, I'm not making this up, and then I weeded the flower beds, all on Sunday. And that's his idea of rest, by the way. So that achiever talent is a driver. And thank goodness we have some that have that talent among us. How about activator? Does anybody have activator? We had one yesterday that has activator. And activator, the shorthand for it, because you know people that are like this, ready, fire, aim. Right? They're always doing. They always want to do. They always want to get it done. And that's a really strong driver too. And the advantage of having someone on our team that has some of that is that they're not going to let us just get stuck in talking about it. They're going to make sure that eventually we get off and we start doing it. How about adaptability? I know Jeff has adaptability. You have adaptability. Thank God. Oh my gosh, 3 of you. Awesome. So that adaptability talent really is kind of what it sounds like. You know, we put together plans. And we say, we're going to do this and this and this and this. And then, invariably, something goes awry. And it's the people with that adaptability talent that just go, well, that's okay, we'll just do it this way instead. Right. And that's a real gift. Because if we don't have a little of that talent around, something goes awry and everybody's like, what do we do? It didn't go according to plan. And so that adaptability is very helpful. How about analytical? We have anybody with analytical? Okay, that surprises me. Wow. Okay, people with analytical talent naturally analyze. And so if you're at a meeting and somebody's going, okay, but now hang on for a second. Yeah, that's a really clear, easy cue to maybe there's some analytical talent here. And I always want to say to people, especially at this stage, you all are getting introduced to this, but the people that you're interacting with probably have not done this. So you don't know what their talent themes are and they don't know anything about this. That doesn't mean that it isn't helpful, because now, instead of looking at the person and just kind of going, well, yeah, they're different, or maybe even saying, yeah, they're a little bit of a pain in the tush, now you can say, wait a minute, maybe there's some of that analytical talent going on here. I'll tell you a story about that in just a couple of minutes. How about a ranger? 1, 2, 3, me makes 4. The people with a ranger talent kind of know what the balls are in the air, and they know how to kind of move them around a little bit so that they work in place. And actually, after I was at the parish for 12 years when Steve and I moved, one of the women that I worked with, who I had been her supervisor, and it had not always been an easy relationship, she actually said to me, Lisa, the thing I'm going to miss about you most is that you always knew how to kind of put things in a way that could make them work for the best. And she said, I don't know what we're going to do without that. And that was actually one of the kindest things that anybody had ever said to me, you know, because she was looking at that gift of the arranger. Who has belief? Okay, awesome. Belief in this construct is not what we would normally think of when we say that word. You know, we hear belief and we're thinking belief in God and so on. In StrengthsFinder framework, belief could be that, but it could be other things as well. It's an overriding value or system of value. There are certain things that come most important. And I was sharing the other day with someone, our daughter Carrie was a dancer. She danced all the way from kindergarten through her senior year of high school. And if you've ever known anybody that dances, they get into a studio and that becomes kind of their family, you know, their family away from home. And there was a year where Carrie started to sign up for classes for the next year, and she came home and she was really kind of dejected, and she said, I'm going to have to move studios. And I said, why? And I thought, oh my gosh, something happened. And she said, well, because the only classes at my level next year are on Saturday mornings. And Saturday is my time to go camping with Mike and Dad. And that was her priority. And so even though dancing was this huge part of her life, for 2 years, she went to a different studio because she wasn't going to give up that time with her dad and her brother. That's belief in a nutshell. Does anybody have command? So you know people with command. I know you do. Because the people with command that use it really well are the ones that say at a meeting, okay, you know what, I'm sorry, but I really think that we just have to kind of get moving. And it's that person that says, at some point, someone just has to take charge. That's the mature side of command. The immature side of command can sometimes be they're just bossy. Right? And we all know those people. We all have those people in our lives. But that's a talent when we really think about it in that way, and we help them to use it in that way. How about communication? All right, we got one. Thank you. By the way, Jeff, did you see that? She has communication. Yeah. We were joking the other day about who did he need to partner with. I said, you need to find someone with communication. Communication people, very often they communicate, they think out loud. They're very comfortable articulating. And so if we've been in the midst of something like planning strengths workshops, we can give some of that communication task to the person with that talent, and they're going to help us figure out how do we best get that message across. Our son has communication talent number 1. And our running joke in our family is with Michael, there's no such thing as a short story. So when Michael calls on Sunday, we put him on speakerphone. And I do the dishes and, I mean, it's just because we're going to hear. But I love it. Even though I only see him a few times a year, I always feel like I know what's going on because that's who he is. Connectedness. Wow. Only, okay, 2 of us, 3 of us. Connectedness talent is, it comes out in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's connecting people with people. So it's that networking, relationship, friendship kind of thing. Sometimes it's connecting people with ideas, processes, facts, stories, whatever. Sometimes it's more of everything happens for a reason. We're all connected beyond time and space. And because of that, early on, when StrengthsFinder first came out, connectedness was actually called spirituality. And then people that didn't have connectedness began to say, but wait a minute, I'm spiritual, I don't have the talent. Kind of like what happens now with some with belief. And they began to see that connectedness gets manifested in all sorts of ways. Connectedness in the big distribution is kind of middle of the pack in terms of the most frequently found and the least frequently found. But in ministry circles, you'll find lots of people with connectedness. It's just one of those things. That's why he likes conspiracy theories. Now we know. Yep. Yeah. How about consistency? Okay. Consistency people understand that we need to have structure. We need to have rules. We need to know where things fit and why. And thank goodness for you. And so here's my story. Steve, my husband, has connectedness, number 3. And early on in our marriage, that actually was kind of a source of friction. We didn't have the words for it yet. We didn't know what it was. But Steve always wanted to know, well, why is that way? And where does that fit? And then we became parents. And then it was things like, well, Michael broke the rule. And I would say, well, Michael didn't exactly break the rule. And I believe me, I understand the need for rules. I really do. It's just not that's not my go-to way of thinking. And then we did StrengthsFinder. And I went for the training. And I got my full 34 in rank order. And I found out the consistency is my number 32 out of 34. And that's actually been really helpful. Because now when Steve gets to that point where he's looking for that structure, and by the way, I always say, I am so glad that my husband, who's a structural engineer, has consistency talent. Yeah, when I'm driving over the bridge that he designed, I'm really glad that he has consistency talent. But now when that starts to get on my nerves, which it does every now and again, I can take that step back and say, but you know what, there's a talent there. And whether you know what the talents of the people are in your lives or not, you do get to that point where you begin to say, wait a minute, there's something really important here that we need to be attentive to. Context. All right. People with context talent need to know and bring to us an appreciation for what has been. So they're very attentive to how did things come to be? Why do we do things this way? And then they bring that to us so that we don't make the same mistakes over and over again. They also are going to be the ones that are going to say, well, wait a minute, I need to understand this in order to think about the future process. And to really kind of launch into something different. How about deliberative? Okay. People with deliberative talent naturally deliberate. So you're going to take something and you're going to look at all of the ins and outs and is this better or is this better? And I often say people with that kind of deliberative talent and analytical, if you beat people with that, you're going to safeguard us. Because you're not going to let us go launching into something until we've really thought it through. And that's really important. Again, you can start to see how all of this could really make a difference in a team. Because if you're working on a project together, and especially if you've got some people with achiever talent, and especially if you have somebody with some activator, then it's going to be the person with that deliberative or that analytical that's kind of hold everything in check. We had the stewardship committee that had been together for like 5 years, and they were my favorite group of people to work with. I loved going to their meetings. And then we did StrengthsFinder. And one of the older gentlemen on the commission said, I really feel called to help with youth ministry. And he had just retired, so he had a little bit more time, but he said, I don't feel like I can do both. And so I'd like to leave the stewardship commission in order to serve with the youth minister. And of course, I said yes, and off he went. And all of a sudden, the commission got off the rails. And I got to the point where I didn't want to spend time with them anymore. They were so unpleasant to be with. And it seemed like every time I turned around, one of them was saying, well, I don't understand why we didn't do this. And then someone else would say, well, yeah, and if we'd done that, then we could have done this. And all of a sudden, I felt like I wasn't fulfilling my responsibilities. And so the chairperson of the group and I had talked about this because she was feeling it. And one night, I wasn't able to be at the meeting, and she called me the next day and she goes, I have to tell you what happened. And I thought, oh gosh. I said, what? And she said, well, they got into one of those conversations. You know, the one about why and that? And I said, yeah. And she said, and I just happened to look down at the list of the commission members and their talent themes. And of the remaining 8 people out of 9, 5 of them had activator in their top 5. And it turned out Tom, the fellow that moved to youth ministry, had analytical and deliberative. And so that one person, being himself, had kept those activators from getting frustrated because we weren't moving fast enough. Now, the rest of the parish had not yet done StrengthsFinder, so we couldn't go out and say, hey, anybody that has deliberative talent, could you please come join us? But what they did was they said, let's try to discern a couple of people that we have a sense they just have some of that. We don't know for sure, but we're going to know. And they did. They identified like 4, 2 men, took the invitation, and all of a sudden everything was back in place. But they knew that one of the reasons that they had been sought out was that it seemed like they had some of that. And when they actually did StrengthsFinder, one had analytical and one had deliberative. And so, but that's how this works. Because all of a sudden then we were back in focus and could do what we needed to do. Developer. Yeah, we've got good developers in this diocese. That's awesome. Developer very often is about people. It's helping people to be their best, bringing out the best in people. Sometimes it's other development of process, development of materials, in my daughter's case, development of product, but a lot of times it's a people development. Discipline. That is actually not unusual. Discipline is one of the least frequently experienced, and one of the most frequently experienced is achiever, which I always find fascinating. So we've got all these people who are hardwired to achieve, but most of them don't have the discipline to make it happen. But discipline is exactly what it sounds like. And in fact, I think it was yesterday, one of the women had discipline and achiever. And she was kind of like, oh yeah. But they bring that to the rest of us. And I always tell people in ministry, if you have somebody on your team that's got discipline, keep them around, because they're really gonna keep us all kind of in order. How about empathy? Oh my goodness, oh thank God. You all are, and I do say this very seriously, empathy is my number 34. So I have such a value for people that have that talent, because they really do have this strong sense of the feelings of others. The hard thing about empathy is everybody else knows that you have that strong sense too. And so people kind of come to you with their stuff sometimes. And she's going, oh yeah. But especially in ministry, we need those people that have that sense of who are the people that are hurting, and how do we express that care for them, and then what do we do with all of that? Focus. No focus.
No focus or discipline.
What's that? Oh, okay, Marie. Yeah, Marie has focus. Yeah. Focus is all about keeping the goal in mind. So we don't let ourselves get too distracted or too, kind of pulled in other directions. Futuristic. I think I'm the only one in this group with that. I'm always looking at some day other than today. Most of the time, that's a good thing. Every now and again, not so much. Yeah. Harmony. Wow. Wow. 5 of you. Harmony, I'd love to hear from you all because harmony kind of fascinates me. A lot of people that have harmony say they want everybody to get along and they're a little bit mystified as to why we can't always get along. And she's going, yeah. Do you also find that you're kind of made a mediator whether you want to be or not? Yeah. Yeah, she's saying yeah as well. Yeah, I do think that that's kind of the mixed blessing with harmony. The people with harmony talent have that desire to bring people together. The shadow side is twofold. The shadow side is one, sometimes the people that are in conflict are going to come to you looking for some help. The real shadow side of harmony is sometimes it gets to be peace at all costs. I don't want to be involved in it. And so she's going, yep, that would be me. Yeah.
I was told if you get confronted with too much, you just walk away.
Yeah. Yeah. And I understand that. I don't have harmony talent, but and maybe it's that empathy being way down. By the way, and I do want to say this again in a different way now, when we talked about, that path that doesn't get used, gets overgrown, but that doesn't mean that we can't use it. Think of something like empathy number 34. That doesn't mean that I can't be empathetic. I can be, and I am. It does mean that that's not my natural response to a situation. And so my friend Stephanie, who has empathy in her top 5, and she and I do a lot of work together. We were actually doing a presentation one time, and she caught me saying, it's not that I can't be empathetic, and in fact, I can look at a situation and I'll have all kinds of ideas. And she went, oh my gosh, did you hear what because that's it. My natural response in a situation may not be that emotional empathy, but I'm certainly going to have some ideas of how that person might need some help or whatever. Harmony. Ideation. Jeff has ideation. Yeah. All ideas all the time. And those who work with him are probably saying, could you please turn that off every now and again? Yeah, one of my colleagues, when we first did StrengthsFinder, said, okay, so now can we tell you that the running joke around here has always been, oh God, here comes Lisa with another one of her grand ideas. But the really cool thing about that was this, because I knew that, and I knew that there were times where I would come and I would say, this is what our Formation Commission has been talking about, and then I would kind of lay it in their laps to figure out what to do about it, and I knew that. And so together, without my real knowledge of it, a group of the staff that worked with me closely decided that if they were at a meeting and something came up where they needed some new ideas, they would come to me and they would start by saying, you don't need to be a part of the solution. But here's what happened. What ideas do you have? What a blessing. First of all, I felt like then I could make a contribution, but I didn't feel like I was burdening them with the new idea. So, and again, you can see how this could play out with all different kinds of talent themes. My friend Father Bill has self-assurance in his top 5, and it's really low for me. I literally called him at times and said, what would Bill do in this situation? And he walked me through it enough that now it still isn't a natural reaction to me, but I know a little bit more about what to do about those kinds of things. Okay, ideation. Includer. Anybody have includer? Awesome. Includer is about everybody has a place. And I don't know about you, but a lot of the people that I know with includer talent are also very sensitive to exclusion. Do you get upset when people are being excluded a little bit or being left out? A little of that, yeah. And that's a gift. Because when we really, sometimes we don't know that we're leaving others out. We need somebody to point it out to us. I was in a parish not long ago, and we were talking about what's going well at the parish and what do you have to build on. And of course, in the midst of that, what's coming to mind that you need to be thinking about. And one of the people raised their hand, and he said, this has been bothering me for a really long time, and I've just never said it to anyone. And Father said, well, what? And he said, do you realize that our Hispanic brothers and sisters never get to have Sunday Mass in the church? They're always in the lower hall. And that doesn't feel right to me. And Father went, oh. And they started talking about, well, what if we were to go every other week? Or what if we were to designate a certain Sunday of the month or whatever, where we switch places? That's a really amazing use of that talent. Individualization. Anybody? All right. You see every individual as that individual person. And so you're looking at what's the gift in that person, or what's the special thing about that person, which is interesting knowing that you also have woo. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute. Input. All right. Do you collect things? Not a lot. Do you collect stories, information? Oh, information.
Learner's number one.
Yeah, yeah,
I have trouble doing
yeah,
the two of them.
yeah. So input's all about,
I read cookbooks like library books. And
yeah,
learn, you know.
yeah. And the interesting thing about input talent is a lot of times the person with that talent, and this is why I had a hard time at first seeing it, it's not that it's even a conscious thing all the time, but there is this something, and for me it came out when I started having to move multiple times, and I was trying to figure out what to do with my books. And it was because I knew what was in those books, and I felt like that could be helpful to somebody at some point. And so what I finally had to do was to say, okay, so I'm going to do that by way of giving it away, because then whoever needs it will find it. But that input talent is a really interesting one. Intellection. Okay. People with intellection talent think about things. Yeah. And once thought through, you're golden. Yeah. So someone with that talent is going to bring that to our ministry together. Thanks be to God. Learner. Okay, learner, oh my gosh. So learner's a little bit like intellection. People with learner talent have that need to learn, that desire to learn. So if we're in the midst of doing something new, and we're trying to learn all about what are other people doing, what are the best practices, unleash them on that. You know, let her think about it once she's learned it, and then come back, and then you get to deliberate on it, and then we're going to act on it, right? Each of the talents have a need attached. Learners need to learn. People with input need that input, that information. People with empathy have a need to be empathetic. And so that's a real easy way to kind of think about not only your own talents, but the talents of others. Where are those strong drivers? Maximizer. Okay, again, you know people like this. They're the ones that are always trying to say, how do we make it better? It's that good to great. How do we make it better? That's the maximizer. Positivity, I know we've got a couple. Oh my gosh, we've got 3. So the positivity talent is really wonderful because they really do bring that positive perspective to the rest of us. We miss them when they're not there, because we get accustomed to having that positive boost that just doesn't get mired so much in the stuff that's going on. My favorite ever strengths experience was the woman that was our office manager in the office that I was a part of, Peggy. Peggy had positivity and includer, number 1, number 2. And when she did StrengthsFinder, she came in and she didn't say a word. She just handed me the piece of paper. And I looked at it, and it was so her. So I went, oh my gosh, Peggy, what did you think when you saw that? And she said, I printed this out last night, and I sat at my desk, and I looked at that paper, and I said to myself, when I die, I'm taking this, and I'm giving it to St. Peter, and I'm going to say I did the very best with what I was given. And I thought, if that isn't positivity, I don't know what is. But what I recognize is when Peggy was gone, like when she went on vacation, the whole office felt a little flat, because I was so accustomed to her being that person that would go, oh, it's okay, we'll figure it out. Don't worry about it. Relator, thank goodness for one, two, okay. Relator people really have, do you have like lifelong friends? Yeah. You? Yeah. There was a woman yesterday that said, my best friends are, I met on the first day of kindergarten, the first day of first grade, and the first day of high school. You know, that's Relator. My pastor, Father Jan, he has Relator. I never went anywhere with him that I didn't meet somebody that he had gone to high school with or worked with in a previous life or whatever. And they bring that Relator ability to all that we do. So they help us to make those good, strong relationships. Responsibility, we've got a few. Oh my gosh. Wow, are you a diocesan staff or what? Yeah. So responsibility talent is about not only are we going to make sure it gets done, but we're going to make sure it gets done well. And we're going to keep feet to the fire. We're not going to let anybody kind of slip out of this. The shadow side of responsibility is feeling individually responsible. And so a lot of times people with responsibility talent have to learn that part of responsibility very often is delegating, because otherwise you just get burdened down with all of the things that you're responsible for. Restorative, I don't think we have anyone here today with that. Restorative talent is sort of this interesting combination of problem solving and healing. It's that person that can stand in the middle of a mess and point the way out. And it is another one where people that have that talent, the rest of us kind of tend to go to them when we're in the middle of a mess. We had Priest on the first day who has restorative number 1. And he said, so the good news is I've experienced this all of my life. The bad news is now I know that it's going to be for the rest of my life too. And yeah, that is the deal. But at the same time, he had already given multiple examples of how that talent is at work in his ministry. And people had already affirmed the many ways in which they had already experienced that. So good news and bad news there. Self-assurance. I don't think we've had anybody this week with self-assurance. That it really is just what it sounds like. The people with self-assurance talent, not only are they just innately sure of themselves, they're always a little bit mystified that the rest of us aren't. So I often tell people our son has self-assurance in his top 5, and I often say, you know, being the mom of a 15-year-old boy with self-assurance was a little of pure hell. Being the mom of a 33-year-old with self-assurance is pure joy. You know, he always knows that it's going to be okay. And so in all of the, you know, because he's in that generation that really got crunched when the economy was bad, he always just said, but, you know, it's going to be all right. It'll work out. That's and that really is a gift. Talk about God's grace. Significance, Marie has, right? Yeah. And significance talent, a lot of times, and she wasn't so sure about this. My shorthand for it has always been people with significance talent want to make a difference. You know, they want to have an impact. And of course that gets experienced in all different kinds of ways. But they're not going to do something just for the sake of doing it. There's going to be a reason behind what they're doing. Well, Jeff kind of said the same thing, so you'll have to just keep calling that forth in her. Strategic. Yeah. So are you surprised that he's the guy that keeps talking about planning? Yeah, because strategic talent is all about we need a plan. And they're the ones that naturally look at, okay, so this, and this naturally leads us here. That's the strategic talent. And then finally, woo. We have a couple with woo. Woo is wins others over. They're naturally convincing. So if you need somebody talked into something, come to one of them. People with woo talent also tend to be people that can walk into a room of strangers and say, oh, it's just a bunch of friends I haven't met yet. And what a gift that is. So that's the 34 themes in a nutshell. Oh, I did skip competition. Do we have anybody with competition? I have a really cool competition story, actually. Competition is that we've got to stay ahead. And that's a really strong driver, even in ministry. A couple of things about competition. Yeah. You didn't get to cross it off. I love it. So I was with a group of. Yeah, that's right. There you really go. I was with a group of college students, and they had done StrengthsFinder, and I was doing this. And one of the young men had competition in his top 5, and he said, can you explain that a little bit? I said, you know, people with competition talent, it's like there's something over their shoulder that they're always trying to get just a little bit ahead of. And so a lot of times they're the person that will be looking for a percentage increase or a better grade or a win or whatever. And he kind of went, okay, and he didn't say any more, and I thought, well, all right, he's kind of figuring it out. The next day, the chaplain, the priest that was the chaplain, was gone for about an hour and a half in the afternoon, and I didn't think anything of it. I figured he was working on his homily, you know. And so that evening at dinner time, Father John said, I need to explain to you why I slipped away. I went, okay. And he said, you know that young man that asked about competition? And I said, yes. And he said, his brother is self-destructing. He's chemically addicted, and it's really messing up the family. And when you said that about competition, he realized that that's what's standing over his shoulder that he needs to get ahead of. And so young man and his brother and his father had showed up at Father John's door at lunchtime and said, can we talk? And they ended up doing this just very impromptu intervention. And at the end of the meeting, the dad said, and then that StrengthsFinder thing, can I get one of those codes? Because he said, I need to know more about this. And I thought, oh my gosh, what an amazing gift that young man had that insight, that this is the thing that competition talent is driving me to do something about. And I think that's one of the blessings of StrengthsFinder in general, is that it really can impact us in all sorts of ways that are probably right now very unexpected, but nonetheless, they're there. So let's come back. I wanted to just mention this so that you have an understanding of the way in which this can impact parishes, but I also wanted to talk with you for just a minute about the impact of this in organizations. A separate body of Gallup research focuses on how organizations fulfill their mission. And they first began to work with schools, and then businesses, and nonprofits, and hospitals, and they finally did research around faith communities. And what they found in every situation is that when people have a deep sense of belonging, when they feel that they are valued, when they are what the researchers call engaged, you know what that's like? When they're deeply rooted in that organization, they're more likely to fulfill the mission of the organization. So in schools, when students and faculty have that deep connection with each other, when they feel like every person is valued, school achievement is higher. You don't have to look for teachers as often because they stay. Students aren't absent as often. There aren't as many accidents. There are fewer safety incidences. All around this idea of belonging, of value for the person. In organizations like yours, when you have that sense that I have the ability to make a meaningful contribution, you're more likely to be engaged at work. And that engagement also makes a difference in your own life and well-being. You experience less burnout. You experience less stress. In faith communities, when people have that deep belonging, they're more likely to live out their faith in all of the ways that we would hope that they would. And one of the primary drivers is when people can say, here, in the parish, in the office, at the school, I have the opportunity to do what I do best. I get to make a meaningful contribution. That doesn't mean that you're always going to get to do that. We all have things that we have to do that we really don't feel like they tap into our talents. But you don't want to set yourself or your organization up for doing that all the time. You want to have that ability to tap into your talents as often as possible, and you want to give that to each other. Some of the groups that I'm working with have actually gotten to the point where they've shifted responsibilities a little bit. You know, as they're working on something, somebody will go, you know what, I know this is my job, but it just is not me. And somebody else goes, oh, I'll take that, you take this. And they end up first usually informally and then later on formally kind of shifting their job descriptions a little bit. Now that's an extreme example, but it does make a difference. When we're able to tap into our talents. So the later body of research around strengths has actually been around building effective teams. And if you look at page 5, I'll show you what they've found. No surprise, we thrive when we operate from our strengths. The team is going to be more engaged when people have an opportunity to draw on their talents, and therefore our work together is strengthened. Gallup did 2 kind of side-by-side bodies of research, one actually doing field work and case studies with organizations, and then the second through a series of random surveys. And what they found is the most effective teams are ones where the designated leader has not gone out and found others like him or herself, but rather has a wide variety of talents. And I've already plotted you all, so I can tell you, you know, you're pretty nicely spread. But I'll tell you, I do a lot of work with parish leadership groups, and it's very interesting because some of the parishes where the pastor's been there for a long time, he hasn't consciously done it, but he's gone out and found other people like himself. And, you know, so the good thing is everybody kind of gets along. The bad thing is you don't have that alternate perspective, and you don't have that complementary partnership among the staff members or the parishioner leaders. So think about this from the standpoint of, let's say you were starting a new project, or you're revamping a current thing, or you're revitalizing something. What the folks at Gallup have done is they've taken the 34 themes and they've grouped them into 4 domains of leadership. And then, of course, they did more research because that's what they do. So let's say you're starting that new project. Some teams, and we're starting bottom right on your sheet. Some themes, naturally lend themselves towards strategic thinking. So people like Jeff are always going to be looking for where's the plan. And the person with deliberative is always going to be deliberating. And it's not that you're ever going to have all of those themes represented in a group, but you're surely going to have some people that have some of that talent. And you're going to lean on them in that point where you're fact-finding and you're learning and you're building the plan. In the midst of that, as Jeff has already said, you need to be building up the team as a team. You need to be forming. And the people with that relationship building talent are the glue that hold us together. And without that glue, we fall apart. Without that glue, we're never going to be able to do what we can with that relationship. I mentioned my friend Stephanie. Stephanie has all of the relationship building themes in her top 15. She leads through relationship. She lives in Northern California. I live in Cincinnati. We've got 2 board members of our nonprofit that live in the Twin Cities, and one that lives in Missoula, Montana. So, of course, all of our meetings are virtual. And at the end of the meeting, Stephanie will say, okay, so now when are we meeting again? And then who needs to connect with whom between now and then? And it's that relationship. She just knows that that's what's going to keep this moving forward. That relationship talent holds us together. And then, once we've developed the plan, or once we've got the process in place, or once we've got the program ready to go, then we have to have those people that bring it to the rest of the community, whether it's the rest of the staff or the rest of the diocese. So you all are getting ready for annual appeal, and you start thinking about, who needs to be part of the plan for, getting the word out. Or you're working on a new staff development process. Or you're just in your office and you realize that somebody needs to have a heads up so that they know what's going on. That influencing talent is really important at that stage. And then finally, we have to get it done. We have to execute it. And that doesn't mean, as we've said before, that doesn't mean that you're going to be the people that are always going to do it, but you're certainly going to help us to get it done. You're going to make sure that it gets done, and you're going to help us to learn what it means to be deliberative. You're going to make sure that we've deliberated and thought it through. All of you with responsibility, you're not always going to do it. You're not going to take responsibility, but you're surely going to make sure that it gets done. And you're not going to be happy until it is. So 4 domains of leadership. Each one of those domains is important. You begin to see how this works in real groups. This is our Catholic Strengths and Engagement community. This is a grassroots nonprofit organization that's supporting parish and diocesan leaders really throughout the world, but mostly in the United States and Canada. And this is the board as it was a few months ago with one that wasn't there. Sue has now had to leave so that she can take care of some things at her parish. But you can see they were pretty nicely spread. They had some of that nice strategic talent. They have lots of relationship building. They have some influencing talent, which is really good. Influencing is tending to be the domain that's a little bit light in the ministry circles that I'm working with. I've become convinced that in some cases we kind of hold some of those people at arm's length. The people that have really strong command and competition, we may kind of go, I don't know that I need that in my group, which is very unfortunate. And then we've got some executing people, but now look at what happens if you take Sue out, which is what happened. All of a sudden, Martha's the only one with executing talent in the group. If you add Stephanie and I to the mix, well, if you add Stephanie to the mix in any group, you're going to suddenly multiply your relationship building. But now we've got me over there and executing a little bit. And so I have now become, Stephanie and I are kind of advisors to this group at this point. We helped to start it and did our term on the board, and now we're kind of cycling out. So what happens now is if we have a meeting where I'm not able to be there, Martha takes responsibility for calling me and saying, this is what we talked about needing to do. And then she and I kind of do the, okay, let's make the checklist, and then let's make sure that we've got somebody assigned to each one of those steps. I'm still in an advisory capacity, but I usually have my little things that I need to get done. So you can see how this could really make a difference. And if you look at the worksheet on page 6, you can really start to see this. Because now, let's say that your group is looking at how you function together. And by the way, this is your group. These are the people that are here today, plus Marie. Boy, do you guys have relationship building in the pocket. But you've also got some good strategic thinking. You've got people with that influencing talent, which is awesome. And you got a lot of executing talent, which is amazing. So let's say that you're in your groups, you're looking at, starting something, or how do we make this better, or how do we partner with others? And you could list your team members, plot everybody out. Notice that I've put it's the first theme, it's the second theme, I've put the position there, because that does make a difference. That number one theme is your strongest talent. I often tell people I rarely have an idea that's not future-oriented. And most of you probably have 2 or 3 themes that you experience more together than you do apart. And you can have those conversations with each other. And then for the sake of whatever the task at hand is, you could go around your table and say, what is your preferred domain? If left to your own devices, which way would you focus? Jeff will always say strategic thinking. Put me there. So would I, actually. But for the sake of getting something done, because almost all of my themes are over here, and even more so when I factor in my next 5, sometimes I have to be over in that executing thing because I may be the only one or one of the only ones in the group that has that. So what domain do you prefer? And then what, for the sake of this particular goal, will you keep in mind? Again, that doesn't mean that you're the only one that's going to be there, but it does mean that you're going to keep that in your mind's eye. You're going to be attentive to that. And then, if you look at that worksheet, I've also got a place for you to write strengths and talents so that you can actually say, I know that I'm really good at organizing. Or I know that I'm really good at kind of finding the blind spot. Or I know that I'm really good at follow-up, or whatever it might be. And then you write that down too. And then you're attentive to the talent themes that help you to have that strength. See how this works? So what I'd like to invite you to do in your groups, first of all, just within your group, go around the group and everybody share their top 5. Talk about, for right this moment, here's my preferred domain. Doesn't mean you always get to do it that way, but this is my preferred domain. And then what I'd like to invite you to do is simply affirm each other. How have you experienced these talent themes and these domains in each other to date? And we're actually going to kind of stop with that. We'll come back, I'll do any questions, thoughts, wonders, etc. But I just want you to have a little bit of time to, first of all, talk through a little bit your current, this is where I would like to, if possible, function from. This is where I know I sometimes have to function from. And then affirm. What do you see in each other that is your current already experience of the domains or the talent, themes, and action. Questions that came up, and I think this is actually a really good tie to everything that we've been talking about, and then I'd like to hear any other questions that you have. The whole idea of, how does this fit with other gifts inventories, spiritual gifts, charisms, Myers-Briggs, etc. Spiritual gifts and charisms first, and I love this because a lot of parishes work with called and gifted and that sort of process. And first of all, it's a wonderful process that tends to appeal to the people that are already engaged. So the ones that are already deeply involved, the ones that are already really rooted in their faith community, they want to know what are my charisms, because that's language that they can relate to. A lot of the parishioners that are with us, but they're not engaged, they're not negative, they're just not already deeply rooted. Spiritual gifts and charisms is a long shot for them because they're not quite there yet. But the whole idea of talents that manifest themselves in all kinds of ways in all of the areas of my life, that's a different thing entirely. And so what a lot of parishes are finding throughout the country is maybe they worked with charisms and now they're introducing strengths, and then they reintroduce charisms later, so that those people that first went through the strengths process then begin to get involved, and then they go, okay, now I'm ready to discern my charisms. And then a lot of parishes that have done nothing start with strengths and then move. My friend Stephanie was actually a called and gifted trainer before she did StrengthsFinder work in the church. And in fact, she does corporate strengths training, and then found out about the Living Your Strengths book and brought it to her parish. And she and her pastor have this really wonderful insight about this, and I think this is just very helpful for us. She said that they started talking about the benefit of both, of having that sense of what your charisms are, but also knowing what your talents are. And the way that they came to realize it is this: when we discern our charisms, we're looking at the what. What are we called to? What are we called to do? What are we called to be? The talent helps us to know the how. How are we going to live out that call? And so she uses the example of she and Father Ron both have discerned the charism of teaching. But Stephanie's all relationship building. So she's going to teach through relationship. Father Ron has a lot of strategic thinking. And so when you hear him preach, he's going to give you the backstory, or the article that he just read, or the context, and then he's going to do the teaching. So they're both carrying out that call, but they're doing it in different ways based on their talents. One of the applications for StrengthsFinder is with teachers, and there's a book called Teach with Your Strengths. And it's same StrengthsFinder, but all of the examples are teaching examples. And so for each of the themes, there are a list of suggestions of how you might use that talent as you are in your classroom. Myers-Briggs is a temperament inventory. And so in the words of the folks from Gallup that do the training, Myers-Briggs gets you into the house, StrengthsFinder gets you into the room. Myers-Briggs is going to give you some of those overarching tendencies or patterns in your temperament, but StrengthsFinder is developmental. So once you know what your talents are, you can begin to build on them. Whereas Myers-Briggs gives you really good self-awareness, but it's not quite as developmental in nature. They all have benefit. You know, and our parish had already been using Myers-Briggs in marriage prep. They continued to use Myers-Briggs, but they added StrengthsFinder because they give us different insights. Almost from day one, married couples started saying, oh my gosh, I wish I had known this when I got married. Not that I wouldn't have gotten married, but boy, it might have been an easier first 20 years of marriage, and now we move forward. A lot of parishes are using StrengthsFinder with confirmation prep, marriage prep and marriage enrichment, RCIA, either during the process or after initiation. They're using it as adult faith formation. They're certainly using it with leadership groups. There's a brand new website, I'll give Jeff the link, that the Archdiocese of Seattle has done, and there are group processes for all of those things, and it's all free to anybody in Seattle or beyond. I mentioned CSEC. That CSEC group has a Facebook group. So you can go online and you can look at CSEC Groups is the name of the group. And there are people from all over. It's not all Catholic, even though it sounds like it is. And so we have a Lutheran pastor, we've got a couple of Baptist ministers, we've got some people from the Church of the Nazarene that are all part of that kind of circle. Questions? Anything else that you guys are wondering about? Like I said, I'm going to be sending Jeff a bunch of stuff, and then he can share it with you. He's also got my contact information. I think Sarah does too. So if you guys have anything that comes up that you're just wondering about, let me know. I've got one parish that's kind of exploring the possibility of maybe me coming back, so it may be that I'm back in the area at some point, either fall or next spring. Yeah.
How do we, especially those of us who are just here on
Yeah.
our own,
Yeah.
how do we go bringing it to our parish?
Yeah, I think the first thing, how do you go back and bring this to, to someone else? I think the first thing is find that other person, whoever that other person is in your parish that you always go to with something like this, and do that. Talk to Jeff. He knows how to get codes. So, you can get the code and have them do it. Eventually, what you're probably going to have to do is go to your pastor or another staff person or whatever and say, is it possible for us to start to look at how we might bring this to the parish? And Jeff's already working with a few parishes that are kind of at that place. And so, then you begin to look at, where would it be the first best fit. Sometimes it's staff, not all the time. Sometimes it's pastoral council, not all the time. Sometimes it's sort of an ad hoc group of just those people that are inclined to something like this. Sometimes it ends up being kind of faith formation or adult faith or small groups or whatever. So it really, that part of it really kind of goes from, the parish experience. But Jeff will talk with you about potential next steps. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, guys. It's been awesome to be with you.